Montana Territory, 1878. The last embers of daylight faded against the jagged Bitterroot Mountains, casting long shadows across the valley where Forrest Lawson stood motionless, watching a distant rider approaching his ranch. At 25, Forrest had already carved out a respectable claim in this unforgiving country. 1,000 acres, a sturdy cabin, and nearly 200 head of cattle. But for all his worldly success, a deep-seated conviction haunted him. The frontier demanded solitude as the price for survival. Every grave he had dug for fallen friends only reinforced his belief. A man ties himself to others out here. He's just digging 2 graves instead of 1. He muttered to his horse as he adjusted his worn Stetson. The bitter Montana wind carried his words away, but the sentiment remained lodged in his heart like a splinter. His ranch hands called him the youngest old man in the territory behind his back. While other men his age sought entertainment in Helena's saloons or courted the daughters of neighboring ranchers, Forrest kept to himself, driven by a singular focus on building his empire alone. The frozen winters and scorching summers had weathered his handsome face prematurely, though his strong jaw, clear blue eyes, and athletic build still turned heads on his rare visits to town. As the rider approached, Forrest recognized the silhouette of his foreman, Pete Garrison. "Telegram from town, boss," Pete called out, extending a folded paper. "Stage got held up again near Clearwater Creek. They're asking for volunteers to help track the bandits." Forrest took the telegram, his expression unchanged. "Law enforcement's getting mighty comfortable asking ranchers to do their job." "There's more." Pete hesitated. "That supply wagon we've been waiting on? Driver got shot, but the wagon made it to town. Everything except, well, except your sister's medicine." A muscle tightened in Forrest's jaw. His younger sister Hannah had come west with consumption, hoping the mountain air would heal her lungs. The medicine from Chicago was her last hope. "I'll ride at first light," Forrest said, his voice betraying no emotion, though his mind was already calculating the 4-day journey to Helena and back. "Have Marcus keep watch on the north pasture while I'm gone." That night, as he packed his saddlebags, Forrest gazed at the small daguerreotype of his parents, both lost to the influenza that had swept through Illinois 6 years earlier. One man can survive anything, he reminded himself, so long as he answers to no one and depends on no one. It was the creed that had carried him west, that had helped him build something from nothing. But in the darkest hours before dawn, doubts sometimes crept in. Was an empire worth building if there was no one to share it with? He pushed the thought away like an unwanted visitor. Sentimentality was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. Helena, Montana Territory bustled with the energy of a city straddling civilization and wilderness. Forrest rode down the main street, dust clinging to his trail-worn clothes. After securing a room at the modest Frontier Hotel, he headed straight for Elliot's Mercantile to inquire about his sister's medicine. The bell above the door announced his arrival, drawing the attention of a young woman organizing shelves behind the counter. She turned, and Forrest felt an unexpected jolt in his chest. She was beautiful in a way that seemed out of place in the rugged territory, 20 years old perhaps, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple style that framed delicate features. Her dress was practical but feminine, cornflower blue calico with small white flowers, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Forrest removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his trail dust. "I'm looking for Thomas Elliot. I've got medicine coming in on the Chicago supply wagon." "My father's away on business in Bozeman," she replied. "I'm Abigail Elliot. I handle all the store matters while he's gone." Forrest nodded, uncomfortable with the direct gaze of her hazel eyes. "Forrest Lawson, ma'am. My ranch is 4 days' ride from here. The medicine is for my sister. Consumption." Something in Abigail's expression changed, a flash of empathy that made Forrest want to look away. "The wagon arrived yesterday, Mr. Lawson, but I'm afraid most of the medical supplies were stolen during the holdup. The driver managed to hide a few items." She disappeared into the back room, returning with a small wooden box. This was all that remained of the Chicago shipments. "Is your sister's medicine among these?" Forrest opened the box with steady hands that belied his internal distress. 3 bottles, none bearing his sister's name. His worst fears confirmed, he closed the box carefully. "No," he said simply. "I'm so sorry," Abigail replied, and her genuine concern caught him off guard. There's another wagon due in 2 weeks, but 2 weeks might be too late, Forrest finished. He was about to thank her and leave when gunshots erupted outside, followed by shouts and the thunder of hooves. Without thinking, Forrest moved toward Abigail, positioning himself between her and the door just as it burst open. 3 men entered, faces partially concealed by bandanas, guns drawn. "Nobody move," the tallest one shouted. "This is a robbery." Forrest felt Abigail's hand grip the back of his coat, but she made no sound. The leader's eyes darted between them, then to the cash box visible on the counter. "You." He pointed his revolver at Abigail. "Empty that box. And whatever's in the safe, too." "There is no safe," Abigail replied, her voice remarkably steady. "Just the box." The robber took a threatening step forward, but Forrest shifted slightly, drawing attention to himself. "The lady said there's no safe," he said quietly. "Take what's in plain sight and be on your way." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You got a death wish, cowboy?" What happened next unfolded in seconds. One of the other robbers, nervously watching the street, shouted a warning. The leader turned, distracted, and Forrest seized the moment, drawing his revolver with lightning speed and disarming the man with a precise shot to his hand. Chaos erupted. The wounded robber howled in pain while his companions returned fire. Forrest pushed Abigail behind the counter, shielding her with his body as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. Outside, more gunfire suggested the town was fighting back. The robbers retreated, cursing and firing wildly as they fled. In the sudden quiet that followed, Forrest became acutely aware of Abigail beneath him, her breath warm against his neck, her heart pounding against his chest. For one disorienting moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough with concern. "No," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "You saved my life." He helped her to her feet, uncomfortable with her gratitude and even more uncomfortable with his own racing pulse. This was exactly the kind of entanglement he had always avoided, the kind that created vulnerabilities he couldn't afford. As townspeople rushed in to check on them, Forrest stepped away from Abigail, rebuilding the careful distance he maintained from everyone. But something had shifted, like the first crack in a dam that had stood solid for years. The robbery attempt had been part of a larger raid on Helena by the notorious Blackwater Gang, the same outlaws responsible for the stagecoach holdup. With the town in turmoil and no medicine for his sister, Forrest faced a decision. The logical choice was to return home immediately, but leaving meant abandoning hope for Hannah's medicine. "Mr. Lawson," Abigail approached him as he stood outside the saloon that evening, staring at the telegram he'd just received from his ranch. "I heard you speaking with the sheriff. You're joining the posse tomorrow." Forrest folded the telegram and tucked it into his pocket. His foreman had reported that Hannah's condition was worsening. "Those bandits have my sister's medicine. Going after them is my only option." Abigail nodded, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did today." "Any man would have done the same," he replied, avoiding her eyes. "That's not true," she said simply. After a pause, she added, "I know about consumption, Mr. Lawson. My mother died of it 3 years ago. We tried everything." Her words trailed off, but the shared understanding hung between them. Forrest found himself looking at her directly, seeing not just her beauty now, but a depth of experience he hadn't expected. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, meaning it. "There's a doctor here, Dr. Williams. He developed a treatment that helped my mother in her final months. It didn't save her, but it eased her suffering considerably. Perhaps it could help your sister while you wait for her proper medicine." Hope, that dangerous emotion Forrest rarely permitted himself, flickered to life. "Where can I find this doctor?" "He left for his cabin yesterday. It's 2 days' ride into the mountains. But I have his notes, his formula. My father and I helped prepare the treatment for my mother." She hesitated. "I could make it for your sister." Forrest stared at her, confounded by this unexpected kindness from a stranger. "Why would you do that for someone you don't know?" In the lantern light outside the saloon, Abigail's expression was earnest. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer, Mr. Lawson. No one should face that alone." Her words struck him like physical blows, challenging the very foundation of his beliefs. The frontier was supposed to be merciless, people self-serving. Yet here stood this woman, offering help with no benefit to herself. "I'm riding with the posse at dawn," he finally said. They're tracking the gang into the Bitterroots. Then I'll prepare the medicine while you're gone, she replied. When you return, it will be ready for your sister. Something unfamiliar and uncomfortable stirred in Forrest's chest. Gratitude, yes, but something more dangerous too. For the first time in years, he was allowing himself to depend on someone else, and the vulnerability terrified him. Thank you, he managed, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. As Abigail turned to leave, she paused. Be careful, Mr. Lawson. That gang has already killed 3 men. He watched her walk away, her slender figure disappearing into the gathering darkness, and fought the urge to call her back. This was not the time for distractions. Tomorrow he would ride with the posse, recover his sister's medicine, and return to his solitary life. This brief connection with Abigail Elliot would become nothing but a memory. But as he tried to sleep that night, his mind kept returning to the feeling of her heart beating against his during those chaotic moments in the store, and the unexpected comfort he'd found in her understanding. The posse's pursuit of the Blackwater gang led them deep into the wilderness, where towering pines and treacherous ravines provided perfect hiding places for outlaws. 7 men had set out from Helena. By the 3rd day, only 4 remained. 2 had turned back with injuries, and 1 had been killed in an ambush. Forrest, along with Sheriff Benton, Deputy Miller, and a tracker named Charlie Yellowfeather, pushed deeper into the mountains. The trail was growing cold when they discovered an abandoned camp, still warm with dying embers. They can't be more than 2 hours ahead, Charlie observed, studying bent grass and broken twigs with experienced eyes. But night's coming, and there's a storm brewing. The sheriff, a veteran of the frontier, scanned the darkening sky. We'll lose them in the dark if we don't push hard now. Forrest thought of his sister, of Abigail waiting in Helena, of the medicine that might be just beyond the next ridge. Then we push, he said simply. The pursuit continued through a gathering storm, lightning illuminating the rugged landscape in harsh flashes. The terrain grew steeper, more dangerous. As they rounded a sharp bend in the trail, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Ambush, Sheriff Benton shouted, just before a bullet struck him in the chest. Forrest dragged the wounded sheriff behind a boulder as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Deputy Miller returned fire from behind a fallen tree, while Charlie disappeared into the brush with alarming speed. How many? Forrest asked, checking the sheriff's wound. 5, maybe 6, Miller called back, ducking as a bullet splintered bark near his head. The sheriff's breathing was labored, blood seeping through his shirt. Get me out of this, Lawson, he gasped. Forrest knew they were trapped. Night was falling, the storm intensifying, and they were outnumbered. The smart play was retreat, but retreat meant abandoning Hannah's medicine. As he weighed his options, a memory surfaced, Abigail's voice saying, no one should face that alone. For years, he'd convinced himself that facing everything alone was strength. Now, pinned down in a mountain pass with a dying man beside him, Forrest recognized the fatal flaw in his philosophy. Alone, none of them would survive this night. Miller, he called out. Can you cover me? What are you thinking, Lawson? I'm going to circle around while they're focused on you. Charlie's likely doing the same from the other side. Miller nodded grimly. On my signal. When Miller unleashed a barrage of covering fire, Forrest sprinted through the trees, using the storm's darkness as cover. Rain lashed his face as he climbed higher, seeking a position above the ambushers. Through sheets of rain, he caught glimpses of movement, the outlaws repositioning. Thunder cracked overhead as Forrest found himself on a ledge above 2 of the gang members. Below, Miller continued to exchange fire, but his shots were growing fewer, ammunition likely running low. The sheriff hadn't moved since Forrest left him. Taking careful aim despite rain streaming into his eyes, Forrest fired twice in rapid succession. One outlaw fell immediately. The other returned fire before stumbling backward and dropping his weapon. The distraction allowed Charlie to strike from the opposite side, taking down another gang member with an expertly thrown knife. The remaining outlaws, realizing they were being flanked, broke from cover to retreat deeper into the forest. Forrest spotted a familiar face among them, the leader from the store robbery. More importantly, he saw the man clutching a leather medical bag that could only have come from the Chicago wagon. Without hesitation, Forrest pursued, leaping from his position despite the treacherous footing. The outlaw saw him coming and fired wildly, missing in the storm's confusion. They crashed together on the rain-slicked ground, tumbling dangerously close to a ravine's edge. "That medicine doesn't belong to you," Forrest growled, wrestling the bag from the man's grip. The outlaw's eyes widened with recognition. "The store? You're that cowboy." He lashed out with a knife, catching Forrest's arm and drawing blood. They struggled at the ravine's edge, each blow made more desperate by the crumbling ground beneath them. When the outlaw lunged again with his knife, Forrest sidestepped, using the man's momentum to send him over the edge. The scream faded quickly beneath the storm's fury. Clutching the medical bag, Forrest staggered back to find Charlie tending to Miller, who had taken a bullet in the shoulder. The sheriff lay motionless where Forrest had left him. "He's gone," Charlie said simply when Forrest knelt beside Benton's body. "Died while you were up there." Forrest closed the sheriff's eyes, a heaviness settling in his chest. Another good man lost to the frontier's violence. Another death that reinforced his belief in the territory's cruelty. "Did you get what you came for?" Charlie asked, nodding toward the bag. Forrest opened it with trembling, rain-soaked hands. Inside were dozens of medicine bottles, packages, and instruments. Among them, he found a small glass vial labeled with his sister's name and the Chicago doctor's instructions. "Yes," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. But the cost was too high. That night, sheltered in a shallow cave with Miller's wound bandaged and the sheriff's body wrapped in his own blanket, Forrest stared into their small fire and confronted an uncomfortable truth. His philosophy of isolation had nearly gotten them all killed. If they'd had more men, if they'd worked together from the start instead of splitting up. "You're thinking too loud, Lawson," Miller said from his place against the cave wall. "What's on your mind?" Forrest hesitated, unused to sharing his thoughts. "I've spent years believing that depending on others is a weakness out here, that the only way to survive is to stand alone." Charlie, who had been silent for hours, spoke from the shadows. "My people have a saying. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. The pack also grieves when one is lost," Forrest countered, thinking of Benton. "Yes," Charlie agreed. "That is the price of belonging. But it is a price worth paying." As the storm raged outside their shelter, Forrest wondered if Charlie was right. Was connection worth the inevitable pain of loss? His thoughts turned to Abigail, waiting in Helena, who had offered help simply because she understood suffering. Perhaps there was strength in that kind of connection too, not just vulnerability. With his sister's medicine secured but a good man dead, Forrest faced the long journey back to Helena with a growing crack in the foundation of his beliefs. Abigail was arranging goods on the newly repaired shelves when Forrest returned to the store 5 days later. He stood in the doorway, trail-worn and somber, his clothes still bearing the stains of the journey. When she saw him, her face brightened, then quickly sobered as she registered his expression. "Mr. Lawson," she set down her inventory book. "You're back." "We lost the sheriff," he said without preamble, "and nearly lost Deputy Miller too." Abigail's hand rose to her throat. "I'm so sorry. Did you find what you were looking for?" Forrest nodded, producing the vial of medicine from his coat pocket. "This might save my sister's life. I owe you a debt for offering your help, Miss Elliot." "You owe me nothing," she replied softly. "Did you come straight to the store? You look like you could use rest and a hot meal." The concern in her voice made something twist in his chest. "I wanted to let you know I'm leaving tomorrow at first light. My sister needs this medicine as soon as possible." Of course. Was there disappointment in her eyes? Or was he imagining it? "I have the treatment I promised you as well. Let me get it." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a wooden box containing several bottles of amber liquid. "These are Dr. Williams' formulation. I've written down the instructions." She hesitated. "I wish I could do more." Their fingers brushed as he took the box, and Forrest found himself reluctant to pull away. "You've already done more than I had any right to expect, Miss Elliot." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with words neither seemed ready to speak. Finally, Abigail said, "You must be anxious to get back to your ranch. I won't keep you." Forrest knew he should thank her again and leave. The logical course was clear: return to his sister, his ranch, his solitary life. Yet he found himself unable to move, struck by the realization that walking away from Abigail Elliot would mean returning to an existence that suddenly seemed incomplete. "Would you join me for dinner tonight?" he asked abruptly, surprising himself as much as her. "As thanks for your help." A smile transformed her face, making something warm unfurl in Forrest's chest. I would like that very much, Mr. Lawson. That evening at Helena's best restaurant, Forrest found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his parents' deaths, his journey west with Hannah, the hard years building the ranch. Abigail, in turn, told him about losing her mother, helping her father with the store, her dreams of someday becoming a doctor herself. Most people laugh when I say that, she admitted, twisting her napkin nervously. A woman doctor seems far-fetched out here. I don't think it's far-fetched at all, Forrest replied honestly. You already have more medical knowledge than most men I know. Her smile was worth the admission. As the evening progressed, Forrest felt walls crumbling that had stood firm for years. When Abigail spoke of her mother's final days, he found himself reaching across the table to take her hand. The simple connection seemed to ease something in both of them. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Lawson? She said as they walked back toward her father's house in the soft evening light. Forrest, he corrected gently. And yes, you may. When you faced those robbers in the store, you didn't hesitate to put yourself between them and me, a complete stranger. Yet you speak as though you believe in keeping your distance from others. Which is the true Forrest Lawson? The question struck him with unexpected force. Which was the truth, his stated philosophy or his instinctive actions? I'm beginning to wonder that myself, he admitted. For years, I've told myself that connections are dangerous out here, that they make you vulnerable. But these past days, he paused, struggling to articulate the shift happening within him. I'm starting to think I might have been wrong. They stopped outside her father's house, a comfortable two-story building behind the store. In the lamplight, Abigail's eyes seemed to search his face for something. What will you do when you return to your ranch? She asked. The question held layers he couldn't fully decipher. Heal my sister. Tend my cattle. Continue building what I started. Alone. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. That was always the plan, he said carefully. Abigail nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing her features before she masked it with a smile. I hope your sister recovers quickly. You're a good brother, Forrest. As she turned to go inside, Forrest caught her hand. Abigail, the words stuck in his throat. Unfamiliar, frightening words about returning to Helena, about seeing her again, about the unexpected feeling that had taken root in his chest. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for everything." She squeezed his hand once before slipping away, leaving Forrest standing alone in the gathering darkness, yet feeling less alone than he had in years. The journey back to his ranch was marked by internal struggle. Every mile that carried Forrest further from Helena seemed to clarify what he'd begun to feel in Abigail's presence, a longing for connection he'd denied himself for too long. When he finally rode into his ranch yard, his foreman Pete rushed out to meet him. You made it back? Henna's been asking for you hourly, Pete said, taking the reins as Forrest dismounted stiffly. Her fever spiked bad 2 nights ago, but she's holding on. Forrest hurried into the cabin where his sister lay pale against white pillows, her breathing labored but her eyes bright when she saw him. You look terrible, she whispered with a weak smile. You're one to talk, he replied, kneeling beside her bed and producing the medicine. I've brought what the doctor in Chicago prescribed, and something else too, a treatment that helped another woman with your condition. As he administered both medicines, Forrest told Hannah about Helena, the posse, the outlaws, carefully editing the more dangerous parts. What he didn't mention was Abigail, though thoughts of her kept intruding as he spoke. That night, after Hannah had fallen into her first peaceful sleep in weeks, Forrest sat on his cabin porch watching stars appear above the mountains. Pete joined him, offering a cup of coffee. Something's different about you, boss, the foreman observed. You went looking for medicine and came back with something else too, I'd wager. Forrest glanced at his friend. For Pete was a friend, he realized, not just an employee. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's known you 7 years, Pete chuckled. You've got that look men get when they've met a woman who's turned their world upside down. Embarrassed, but unable to deny it, Forrest stared into his coffee. Her name is Abigail Elliot. She helped me in Helena when she had no reason to. And now you're wondering if your whole lone wolf philosophy might have a few holes in it. Pete finished for him. Something like that. Pete leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. You know, when my Sarah died in that childbirth fever, I thought I'd never want to risk loving anyone again. The pain was too much. But you know what I figured out eventually? Forrest shook his head. The only thing worse than losing someone you love is never loving anyone at all, Pete said simply. This territory's hard enough without facing it alone. The words echoed what Charlie had said in the mountains, what Abigail had demonstrated through her actions. It seemed the universe was conspiring to challenge Forrest's most deeply held belief. Even if you're right, Forrest replied after a long pause. She's in Helena. I'm here. My ranch, my sister, my responsibilities are all here. Pete laughed. Last I checked, Helena wasn't on the moon. 4 days' ride isn't nothing, but it's not impossible either. For the next week, as Hannah slowly improved under the combined treatments, Forrest found himself drafting and discarding letters to Abigail. Everything he wrote seemed inadequate to express the transformation happening within him. On the 8th day after his return, as he was checking fence lines in the north pasture, a rider appeared on the horizon. Forrest tensed, hand moving to his revolver, a habit from years of frontier vigilance. But as the rider drew closer, he recognized the distinctive bay horse belonging to Helena's mail carrier. "Telegram for you, Mr. Lawson," the man called, pulling his horse alongside Forrest's. "Must be important. They paid extra to have it delivered direct instead of waiting for your next town visit." Forrest's heart quickened as he took the folded paper. Only one person in Helena would have reason to send him a message. Opening it with unsteady hands, he read, "Father returned stop, told him of your sister stop. He knows Dr. Williams personally stop. Doctor returning to Helena next week stop. Might help your sister. If you can bring her stop." Abigail. Forrest read the telegram twice. Possibility blooming like spring flowers after winter's retreat. A reason to return to Helena. A chance for Hannah to receive proper treatment. And most dangerously hopeful of all, a reason to see Abigail again. That night, he discussed the telegram with Hannah, expecting resistance to the difficult journey. Instead, his sister's eyes lit up with determination. "Of course we're going," she said, sitting up straighter than she had in months. "I'm tired of being confined to this bed, this cabin. And besides," she added with unexpected perception, "I want to meet this woman who has you checking the eastern horizon every hour." Forrest felt his cheeks warm. "Is it that obvious to everyone?" Hannah laughed, the sound more precious for its rarity these recent months. "Brother, you've been alone so long you've forgotten that some things show plainly on a man's face." 2 days later, they departed for Helena in a specially outfitted wagon, with Pete in charge of the ranch during their absence. The journey was slow and careful, with frequent stops to ensure Hannah didn't overtax her fragile strength. Still, the mountain air seemed to invigorate her, and by the 3rd day, spots of color had returned to her cheeks. "You know," Hannah said as they made camp that night, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about Miss Elliot offering help because she'd watched her own mother suffer." Forrest nodded, arranging her bedding comfortably near the fire. "That kind of understanding, it's rare," Hannah continued thoughtfully, "especially out here where everyone's so focused on their own survival." "She's different," Forrest admitted, the simple words containing multitudes. "Different enough to make you reconsider all your rules about keeping to yourself," his sister pressed gently. Under the vast Montana sky, with Hannah's knowing eyes on him, Forrest finally voiced what had been growing within him since that first day in the mercantile. "Yes, different enough that I can't imagine going back to the way things were before." "Then I hope she's worth the journey," Hannah said softly. "She is," Forrest replied with certainty. "But the question is whether I'm worth hers." Helena appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. As they approached, Forrest felt an unfamiliar nervousness take hold. What if Abigail's kindness had been nothing more than the generosity she would show any stranger? What if he had misread everything about their connection? They arrived at the modest hotel near sunset, where Forrest secured comfortable rooms for himself and Hannah. After settling his sister with strict instructions to rest, he stood outside Elliot's mercantile, gathering his courage before pushing open the door. The familiar bell announced his arrival, but instead of Abigail, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard looked up from behind the counter. "Good evening, sir. Thomas Elliot at your service. What can I help you with today?" Forrest removed his hat, disappointment washing through him. "Forrest Lawson, Mr. Elliot. I received a telegram about my sister's condition. From your daughter." Recognition dawned in the older man's face. "Mr. Lawson, Yes, of course. Abigail mentioned you'd be coming. He extended his hand, which Forrest shook. She's spoken quite highly of you. Is she here? Forrest asked, unable to mask his eagerness. Thomas smiled knowingly. She's at Dr. Williams' clinic, helping prepare for your sister's examination tomorrow. The doctor returned early and was most interested in your sister's case when Abigail explained it to him. That's very kind, Forrest replied, uncertain how to express his gratitude. Kindness runs in her blood, Thomas said simply. Her mother was the same way. The clinic is 2 blocks down, last building on the right. I'm sure Abigail would be pleased to see you. Forrest thanked him and stepped back into the street, his heart beating faster with each step toward the clinic. Through the window, he could see Abigail moving about the room, arranging instruments on a table, her honey-blonde hair illuminated by lamplight. She wore a simple green dress today, practical but becoming. She looked up as the door opened, and the smile that transformed her face sent a surge of warmth through Forrest's chest. You came, she said simply, as if his arrival confirmed something important. We arrived an hour ago. Hannah's resting at the hotel. Abigail crossed the room, stopping just short of embracing him, propriety reasserting itself in the last moment. How is she? Was the journey too difficult? She's stronger than she looks, Forrest replied, suddenly aware of how close Abigail was standing. The treatment you gave me helped considerably. I can't thank you enough. You already have, she said softly, by coming back. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Forrest wanted to tell her everything. How she had upended his carefully constructed worldview. How thoughts of her had occupied his mind for weeks. How he couldn't imagine returning to his solitary existence now that he'd experienced the connection between them. Instead, he asked, would you join us for dinner? I'd like you to meet Hannah. Abigail's smile widened. I'd be honored. Let me finish here, and I'll meet you at the hotel in an hour. True to her word, Abigail arrived precisely an hour later. When Forrest introduced her to Hannah, the 2 women seemed to form an immediate bond, talking easily about everything from Hannah's symptoms to the latest fashions from back east. Watching them, Forrest was struck by how naturally Abigail fit into their small family circle, as if a space had been waiting for her all along. At one point, she caught him watching her and raised an eyebrow in silent question. He merely shook his head, unable to articulate the contentment he felt in that moment. After dinner, when Hannah retired early to rest before her appointment with Dr. Williams, Forrest walked Abigail back toward her father's house. The streets of Helena were quiet, most businesses closed for the night, lending them a rare privacy. Your sister is remarkable, Abigail said as they walked. She has your determination. She's always been the stronger one, Forrest admitted. Even now, sick as she is, she pushed me to make this journey. For her health. Partly. Forrest hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. But she also insisted I needed to see you again. Abigail stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlight. And did you need to see me again? Yes. The word came out more forcefully than he'd intended. Abigail, I've spent years believing that the only way to survive out here is to stand alone, to need no one. I was wrong. Her eyes searched his face, hope and caution warring in her expression. What are you saying, Forrest? I'm saying that meeting you changed everything. That I rode away from Helena and found I'd left part of myself behind. That for the first time since coming west, I'm thinking about more than just survival. He took her hands in his, a gesture that felt both daring and inevitable. I'm saying that I care for you, Abigail, more than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time. In the silent street, with only the stars as witnesses, Abigail's eyes filled with tears that caught the moonlight like diamonds. I was afraid you wouldn't come back, she whispered. That your life on your ranch would be enough, that you wouldn't feel what I felt when we met. And what was that? He asked softly. That some connections are rare enough to be worth any risk. That some people come into our lives and make us question everything we thought we knew. Her hands tightened around his. That meeting you made me believe in things I'd only read about in novels. Forrest's heart seemed too large for his chest, expanding with joy and terror in equal measure. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, then deeper as Abigail responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how this works, he admitted. My ranch is 4 days' ride from here. Your life, your father's store, Dr. Williams' mentorship, it's all here. We'll figure it out, Abigail replied with quiet confidence. If this is real, and I believe it is, then distance is just another obstacle to overcome. The certainty in her voice sparked a matching conviction in Forrest's heart. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future different from the solitary path he'd always envisioned. A future with Abigail beside him, with laughter in his home, with connection instead of isolation. One step at a time, he agreed, taking her hand as they resumed their walk, starting with getting Hannah well. Dr. Williams proved to be everything Abigail had promised, knowledgeable, compassionate, and deeply interested in Hannah's case. After a thorough examination, he prescribed a comprehensive treatment plan that would require Hannah to stay in Helena for at least 3 months. The mountain air is good for her, the doctor explained to Forrest, but she needs consistent care and monitoring that's difficult to provide on a remote ranch. I'd like her to stay at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house. It's clean, quiet, and just down the street from my clinic. The news created both a challenge and an opportunity. Forrest couldn't abandon his ranch for 3 months, but neither could he leave Hannah alone in Helena. I'll stay with her, Abigail offered when he explained the dilemma. I help at the clinic 3 days a week already. I can look in on her daily, make sure she's following the doctor's orders. I can't ask that of you, Forrest protested. You've already done so much. Abigail's expression turned serious. You're not asking. I'm offering. Besides, she added with a small smile, it gives us time to figure out those obstacles we talked about. The solution they eventually devised was practical, if challenging. Forrest would return to his ranch to oversee the upcoming cattle drive and fall preparations, then ride back to Helena for a week each month until Hannah was well enough to travel home. In between visits, letters would bridge the distance. The night before he was to depart, Forrest and Abigail walked to the small park at the edge of town. Stars carpeted the sky above them, the same stars that would shine over his ranch, creating a connection across the miles that would soon separate them. I've been thinking, Forrest said, his arm around Abigail's shoulders as they sat on a bench overlooking the valley. About what happens after Hannah recovers. About the future. Abigail leaned into him, her warmth a comfort against the evening chill. What conclusions have you reached? That I don't want to go back to living alone. That whatever this is between us, he gestured between them, I want to see where it leads. But I won't ask you to give up your life here, your father, your work with Dr. Williams. What if you didn't have to? Abigail shifted to face him, her expression earnest in the starlight. My father has been talking about opening a second store, expanding into one of the growing communities eastward. What if that community was near your ranch? The possibility stunned Forrest. You'd consider that? Moving closer. I'd consider anything that gave us a real chance, she replied. Especially since. Since what? Abigail took a deep breath. Dr. Williams has offered to formally train me as his assistant. He believes women have a natural aptitude for medicine, particularly in frontier communities where doctors are scarce. If I studied with him for a year, I could establish a small practice of my own afterward, perhaps in a community that needs medical care more than Helena does. Hope bloomed in Forrest's chest, a sensation so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it. The nearest doctor to my ranch is 2 days' ride. The whole county would welcome someone with medical training. It wouldn't be immediate, Abigail cautioned. A year of training, time for my father to establish the new store. I would wait, Forrest said firmly, taking her hands in his. Abigail, I would wait however long necessary if it meant having you in my life permanently. In the quiet park, with the future spreading before them like the vast Montana sky, Forrest did something he'd never imagined doing when he first rode into Helena seeking medicine for his sister. He knelt before Abigail, still holding her hands. I don't have a ring, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And this is faster than most would consider proper. But I've spent too many years alone to waste any more time pretending I don't know what I want. He swallowed hard, finding courage in her radiant expression. Abigail Elliot, when your training is complete and you're ready to leave Helena, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks as she pulled him to his feet. Yes, she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. Their kiss sealed a promise, not just of marriage, but of a shared future neither had imagined possible before their paths crossed in a small-town mercantile. "How will we manage the waiting?" she asked when they finally parted. "A year is a long time." Forrest smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We'll have letters, my monthly visits, and the knowledge that what we're building is worth every day of separation." As they walked back toward town, arms entwined, Forrest marveled at how completely his worldview had transformed. The frontier was still dangerous, still unforgiving, but facing it with someone by his side no longer seemed like weakness. Instead, it felt like the greatest strength he'd ever known. The year that followed tested their commitment in ways neither had anticipated. Winter storms made travel between the ranch and Helena treacherous, forcing Forrest to miss one of his monthly visits. Spring brought flooding that washed out bridges and trails, delaying letters for weeks at a time. Summer saw Forrest battling cattle rustlers who threatened his livelihood, while Abigail faced the demands of her medical training and the challenges of helping her father plan his new store. Yet through it all, their bond only strengthened. Each letter was treasured, each reunion more precious for the separation that preceded it. Hannah recovered under Dr. Williams' care and returned to the ranch, where she threw herself into preparing for Abigail's eventual arrival, expanding the cabin, planting a garden, making the austere bachelor's quarters into a true home. When Thomas Elliot finally opened his second store in the growing settlement 20 miles from Forrest's ranch, it was cause for celebration throughout the county. More significant for Forrest and Abigail was that it coincided with the completion of her medical training. On a golden autumn day, with aspen leaves turning to flame against the mountains, Forrest waited at the crossroads where the Helena Road met the county trail. When the wagon appeared on the horizon, he felt the same leap in his heart that he'd experienced the first time he saw Abigail in the mercantile. She was more beautiful than ever, her honey-blonde hair catching the sunlight as she stood in the wagon beside her father. When she saw Forrest waiting, she called for her father to stop, not waiting for the wagon to fully halt before jumping down and running the last 100 yards into Forrest's arms. "You're here," he murmured into her hair, holding her tightly. "You're really here." "I'm home," she corrected him, eyes shining with tears and laughter. Finally home. Their wedding 2 weeks later was a community celebration unlike anything the county had seen. Ranchers, townspeople, and travelers from miles around gathered to witness the union of the once solitary rancher and the doctor's assistant who had changed his heart. Hannah served as Abigail's maid of honor, while Thomas Elliot proudly gave his daughter away. Even Dr. Williams made the journey from Helena to attend. As Forrest and Abigail exchanged vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers outside the ranch house, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a desperate search for medicine had led to the greatest healing of all, the mending of a heart he hadn't even realized was broken. "I promise to stand beside you through every storm this frontier brings," he vowed, his voice carrying clearly to all gathered. "To face whatever comes not alone, but together. One lifetime won't be long enough for all I want to share with you, Abigail, but I'll cherish every day we're given." Her answering vow was equally heartfelt. "I promise to be your partner in all things, Forrest. To build a home and a life that welcomes others instead of turning them away. To remind you, whenever you forget, that our strength lies in our connection, not our isolation." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the assembled guests. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing under stars that had once been Forrest's only companions. In the years that followed, the Lawson Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle and well-managed land, but for its hospitality. Travelers in need found shelter, neighboring ranchers gathered for seasonal celebrations, and local families knew they could count on Abigail's medical skills in emergencies. The cabin expanded into a proper house as their family grew, first with the birth of their son Thomas and later their daughter Rebecca. Hannah, fully recovered and vibrant with renewed health, became the county's schoolteacher, bringing education to children who would otherwise have gone without. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Forrest took Abigail to the highest ridge on their property, where they could see for miles in every direction. The ranch buildings below, the distant town where her father's store thrived, the mountains that had once seemed to enforce Forrest's isolation rather than frame his home. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked as they sat together on their horses, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. "Leaving Helena, giving up the chance to work with Dr. Williams permanently?" Abigail's smile was answer enough, but she spoke the words he still sometimes needed to hear. "Not for a single moment. My practice here may be smaller, but it matters more. Our life together is everything I dreamed of during that year of waiting." Forrest reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I used to think the frontier was no place for love, that it demanded solitude as the price of survival. And now," she prompted. "Now I know the truth," he said, watching the last rays of sunlight gild her face. "That love isn't just possible on the frontier, it's necessary. That facing this land's challenges alone isn't strength, but foolishness." He squeezed her hand. "That finding you was the moment my real life began." As they rode home in the gathering dusk, the lights of their ranch house glowing welcomingly in the valley below, Forrest reflected on the transformation of his world. Where once he had seen only danger and connection, now he recognized that the greatest risk would have been never opening his heart at all. The frontier remained as challenging as ever, untamed, unpredictable, sometimes cruel. But facing it with Abigail beside him, surrounded by the family and community they had built together, Forrest Lawson had discovered the truth that had eluded him for so many years, that even in the wildest places, it is love that ultimately tames both the land and the human heart.